Hi, I'm Ian, and I'm on the core PGCE programme. I'm on the 5 to 11 course.
Hi, I'm Ruth. I'm also on the 5 to 11 on the core PGCE.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm also on the 5 to 11 pathway for the core PGCE programme.
My initial expectations of the Viva were that it was going to be a lot easier than it actually was. And to be honest, I don't know if you feel like this, but I perhaps didn't put as much preparation into it as I would have done a written assignment.
Yeah, I think with the Viva, because I think some of us have never really done one before, so we didn't really know what they were asking of us. I think some people really worried, some people thought it might be easier, and then as more information came through, I think we realised that you would have to put as much effort in as you would any other assessment that you would do.
Yeah, for me, I wouldn't say it was the opposite, but I was a little more relaxed about the Viva itself at the start, because I came from, my degree was a very kind of verbal degree, a lot of feedback and a lot of critiquing, so I felt that kind of held me in good stead for the spoken work. However, I agree completely with the preparation. I think that's really something that maybe until the university gave their input, then I wasn't really up to speed with that until that point.
Yeah.
Well, for myself, in terms of approaching this actual the subject knowledge Vivas, and comparing it to how you'd approach maybe a traditional essay or something like that, I really felt that the actual grids themselves were something that I hadn't really concentrated too much upon, and then once I actually got into it, I realised that I could use a lot more of my own personal practice to inform my grids and to really help me narrow down exactly what I'm looking for. So this was something that perhaps I didn't do so much in the essays, really look at my experience on practical teaching placements and what have you, and it really helped me, and that helped my approach as well, I really felt.
Yeah, okay. I also used a lot of the time on PT1 to relate to the grids and the school-based tasks that we did for numeracy and literacy. So the tasks that we used on the first placement, I related that back to my readings and my research that I'd...
Don't be afraid to almost get too much evidence, because I think with mine, even though I knew what I was talking about and I could justify my actions and I could critique other papers, sometimes it was, oh, well, I have done this, but there was no paper evidence or pictures or anything like that to back it up. So I think I went initially with what I'd done, then thought about the 3 areas for English and maths, and then did wider reading around that, and then because of the experience it was easier to be critical.
I think that's really important what you said there about looking retrospectively at your evidence as well, because sometimes in the cold light of day when you're on practical teaching placement, you haven't got the time to continue that kind of academic rigour and reading. But sometimes when you look back, you think, okay, how did my practice actually, how does this relate to the theory? Sometimes you can do it retrospectively as well as beforehand, and it's not necessarily a bad thing.
I think for me with the Viva and preparing for it and making sure that I got enough evidence and I'd done everything that I needed to do, I think you have to think about the types of things that you're going to need to say when you're in there in terms of your progression. Have you looked at the national curriculum? Have you looked at the old and the new national curriculum? Have you read articles that are appropriate? Have maybe you used an international paper? Have you really gone that extra mile so that you know what, if somebody asked you a difficult question when you get in there, have you got enough to show them? Because I know when I got in, I was asked one question and I hadn't really got enough to back it up. I knew what I wanted to say, but I think it's about going with everything. If somebody's going to ask you any kind of question, you want to be able to say, I do actually know about that. And your misconceptions, how can you be critical of that? Have you seen it? Have you not seen it? Is it right for your key stage? Because obviously with your first placement, you've only been in one key stage, and I think use that to its advantage. How can that be used to be critical, not just the diverse learners in your classroom? What about their age? What about all of them?
Yeah, I'd add to that to have a wide spectrum, so going from EYFS up to Key Stage 3, and then with the misconceptions, how would you teach and how would you address those misconceptions and which pedagogy you would use?
Yeah, or if is the one that wouldn't work where you are, that might be good somewhere else, but for you it doesn't work, that would be a good one.
Yeah, it all boils down to that being critical, really, doesn't it? And I think that's important in your preparation, is to look at that critique, really, and to have that backup of looking at one point of view and looking for where maybe the pitfalls are in this particular application of theory and how you can do that. And I think that, for me, that's where the grids really came in useful. And in terms of these preparation grids, some people might like to present a Viva in terms of almost a speech and talk about it, but because you've got to be so much more responsive and looking at the different questions and things that people may pick up on, and you need to have these kind of free-flowing aspects to your presentation so that you can easily jump between one subject to the next and not just be stuck on the one item.
But your grids have got to work for you in terms of your preparation. Don't do a grid because that's what the exemplar says. If there are things on there that aren't going to work for you, don't put them in. I always find like highlighting things that I definitely want to say, that's always useful, especially when you're being critical, because I think you can get to a point where you panic and you might describe a little bit. I highlighted how I was going to be critical and using my PT1. So that worked for me, but it might be that something else would work for you.
Yeah, it's good to have that quick reference, isn't it, and really flip between them.
In terms of evidence and what you could probably take in with you, there's loads of things. Hopefully you should have like a wealth of stuff that you could take. You know, don't overlook your RRP, don't overlook the slides that are given in presentations, because sometimes you could use maybe some slides and highlight things that have been useful to you and say, oh, well, in this lecture we learnt about this, and then I went away and did some further reading. So then you could, like you could take in a paper that you've got, and then you say, so I took these and then I did it in my PT1, and you could show maybe worksheets or a finished piece of work, and then you can be critical about all three and how you've increased your subject knowledge. So this is increasing your subject knowledge. I also had a knowledge record, so when I'd gone and recapped some learning or gone to look at some progression, I made sure I put it in a table that was linked back to different pieces of work, so you can bring in loads and loads of different things to
yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I think for me, these subject knowledge Vivas were almost like a little turning point in my realisation of what I can use as evidence, because it's all evidence, it's all valuable. If I've looked up something specifically, for example, looking at number bond recognition and using some models to help that, if I've looked up, for example, about Deans, the mathematician, and his use of blocks, then why not just take that print out and show how I've highlighted it and applied it to my lessons? Just something so simple that you don't actually really consider too much when you first come to the course.
I think in terms of how you approach the Viva and what your fears or expectations might be, for me, I think that it wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be. I think because I thought it was speaking that you'd be able to go in and you could sort of maybe blag your way through it, and then as we went through all the lectures and things, it became really apparent that no, this is in fact probably harder than an essay, because with an essay you can write a bit, come back to it the next day and think, no, that sounds really rubbish, and redo it. Where with this, you've got to go in, you've got to have your evidence, and you've got to prove to people that you know what you're doing, and don't undercook it, because if you've had a good placement, prove to them that you've had a good placement, you've done something really good, rather than going in and being like, well, yeah, maybe I did this, maybe I did that. If you've, really looked at maths and really gone for different things and tried different things because you've read it somewhere and you've had a really good lesson because of this, don't go in and not have prepared to be able to say that and critique people's work, because actually you've done a really good job.
I'd agree with that. I think it's really important that you can articulate yourself nice and clearly as well, and perhaps have a little bit of a practice of what you're going to say or things you want to say, but remember that you've still got to be adaptable at the time.
Yeah, I think it's important as well to take a kind of a personalised approach to it, really is, because as you're saying, I mean, for yourself, your preparation and your build-up, you were a little bit more relaxed. And I was relaxed coming into it, but then on the flip side of it, my placement perhaps hadn't gone quite so well as I'd have expected it to. And so I'd had to draw on the range of evidence, and it was easy for myself to be critical in a way, and then look at the different aspects of these things. And so it's not necessarily any hindrance how well or how poorly you've done in one thing or another. As long as you can reflect on it accurately, then that's exactly
it's using what you've got, isn't it?
Exactly
the best
right.
that you can. So I think in terms of preparing yourself for a subject knowledge Viva on English, for me, having to tie it in with SSP and early reading, I hadn't heard anything of phonics. I'd never taught it in any of my sort of prior volunteer work or anything before I came to university to do the PGCE. So for me it was going and looking at that, make sure that you know exactly what SSP is, go and have a look at the early reading. Joe put up some journals for us. Go and have a look. Don't think, oh, I don't really need it just yet. Go and have a look at those. And as well, for me, it was, if you're in a placement, I was in year 6 for my first placement, and phonics didn't really, well, I didn't feel it played a big role. And then I went and watched a phonics lesson in reception, and you start to realise how much of an impact SSP has on children right the way through primary school and possibly beyond that. So I think it's really important to go back and look at those fundamental issues before you decide on your Viva grids for English.
It's definitely interesting to think about the impact all these kind of foundations have in the greater scheme of things.
I think the university chose to do the Vivas because it gives you a range of sort of assessments. Somebody might not be that good at an essay, but you know, they can articulate better than somebody else. So it gives you the opportunity, if maybe essay writing or doing a presentation isn't your thing, the Viva gives you that option as well. And for me, with the Viva, having to prepare and preparing what you're going to say, you have to know what you're talking about. So you've definitely done that reading. And I think, especially when you're articulating your own knowledge, I think it's really easy to see if you know what you're talking about, or if you only know that surface knowledge, and then if somebody asks you a question on it, there's nothing underneath. So for me, it really deepened my knowledge of how to do things. And for my subject knowledge Viva, and having to know what I'm doing and thinking about how you tie in what you learn at university, your own practice and literature, it made it so much easier going into my second placement and knowing what evidence I needed, also taking forward things that had worked and doing that again. So I think not only is it a good way of assessing people to know if they definitely know things and if they are confident in their own knowledge, but it's also really useful after the Viva itself.
That's entirely true. I mean, there's value for everybody. I think there's value obviously for the university, as you say. They get to see a wide range of ways of you presenting your information. But also for yourself, it stands you in great stead, not just in terms of when you come on to the next placement, but I feel that it also kind of offers you an insight into how you've got to articulate and justify your own kind of pedagogical choices when it comes to things like interviews, for example, because that's something that you will get pushed on when it comes to the actual interview process when you step forward on that next. So it's very valuable.
Yeah, very valuable.